The words, "an unexpected storm brought them together, a widow and a stranger finding hope in the dark," seemed to hang in the air, a promise of something hopeful amidst sadness. This wasn't just a title, it was the beginning of Sarah's story. A story meant to be told in about 30 minutes, simple enough for a fourth grader to understand, but deep enough to touch the heart. We meet Sarah. She lives in a small, cozy cottage right by the sea. The waves crash against the shore, a constant reminder of the passage of time. Sarah is a widow. Her husband, Tom, passed away a few years ago. He was a fisherman, a strong and loving man. Sarah misses him dearly. Every day, Sarah walks along the beach, collecting seashells and remembering happy times with Tom. Her heart is heavy, like a stone in her chest. The cottage feels empty without him, even though it's filled with his things, his favorite armchair, his fishing hat hanging by the door, his collection of model ships on the mantelpiece. She tries to keep busy, tending to her small garden and baking cookies for the neighborhood children. But at night, when the wind howls and the waves roar, Sarah feels utterly alone. She hopes that one day, the darkness in her heart will fade, just like the stars fade with the morning sun. But for now, sadness is her constant companion. The radio crackled to life one afternoon, interrupting Sarah's quiet tea. A stern voice warned of an approaching storm. Not just any storm, but a big one. The kind that howls and roars and throws waves high into the air. Residents along the coast are advised to secure their homes and stay indoors, the announcer boomed. This storm is expected to bring heavy rain, strong winds, and possible flooding. Sarah sighed. Storms were common here, but this one sounded particularly nasty. She glanced out the window at the darkening sky. The sea was already churning, and the wind was picking up, whistling through the cracks in her window frames. She knew what to do. She had weathered many storms before, both literally and figuratively. First, she brought in her hanging flower baskets from the porch, securing them in the shed. Then, she checked the windows, making sure they were tightly shut. She gathered extra blankets and candles, just in case the power went out. She also made a pot of hot cocoa, a comforting treat for stormy days. As she worked, a sense of unease settled over her. It wasn't just the storm that worried her. It was the thought of being alone, huddled in her cottage, listening to the wind scream outside. She wished Tom were here. He always made her feel safe, no matter how fierce the storm. The storm arrived with a vengeance. Rain lashed against the windows like angry fists, and the wind howled like a hungry wolf. Sarah sat by the fireplace, wrapped in a thick blanket, sipping her hot cocoa. The power flickered a few times, then plunged the cottage into darkness. Meanwhile, down the road, Michael was in trouble. He was driving through the area, hoping to reach his destination before nightfall, but the storm caught him by surprise. The wind buffeted his little car, and the rain made it hard to see. Suddenly, with a sputtering cough, the engine died. He was stranded. Michael tried to restart the car, but it was no use. The engine wouldn't even turn over. He was stuck on a lonely stretch of road, with the storm raging all around him. He pulled out his phone to call for help, but there was no signal. He looked around, trying to spot a house or a building. Through the driving rain, he saw a faint light in the distance. It was Sarah's cottage. He decided to take a chance and make his way towards the light, hoping someone would be there to help him. It was a long shot, but he had no other options. He bundled up his jacket, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the storm. The wind nearly knocked him off his feet. A loud knock echoed through Sarah's cottage, startling her. Who could be out in this weather? Hesitantly, she peeked through the curtains. A shadowy figure stood on her porch, soaked to the bone. She opened the door a crack. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "My name is Michael," the figure replied, his voice strained against the wind. "My car broke down, and I saw your light. Could you please help me?" Sarah hesitated. She was a kind woman, but she lived alone, and it wasn't wise to open the door to strangers, especially during a storm. But looking at Michael's shivering form, she couldn't bring herself to turn him away. "Just a moment," she said, closing the door. She took a deep breath and grabbed Tom's old walking stick from the corner, just in case. Then, she opened the door wide enough for Michael to step inside. He stumbled in, dripping wet and shivering. "Thank you so much," he said, his teeth chattering. "I don't know what I would have done." Sarah eyed him cautiously. He looked harmless enough, but she couldn't shake off her unease. "Come in," she said, gesturing towards the fireplace. "Let's get you warmed up." She knew Tom would have done the same. Helping someone in need was always the right thing to do, even if they were a stranger. Sarah busied herself, finding a thick towel for Michael to dry off with. "Here," she said, handing it to him. "Get those wet clothes off. I'll see if I can find you something dry to wear." She rummaged through Tom's old clothes, eventually finding a sweater and a pair of trousers that would fit Michael reasonably well. They were a bit big, but they were dry and warm. As Michael changed, Sarah made another pot of hot cocoa. She added a generous helping of marshmallows, hoping it would lift their spirits. When Michael returned, dressed in Tom's clothes, he looked a little less like a drowned rat and a little more like a grateful guest. "Thank you again," he said, accepting the mug of cocoa. "You're a lifesaver." They sat by the fireplace, the only light coming from the flickering candles. An awkward silence hung in the air. Sarah didn't know what to say. She hadn't had a visitor in ages, let alone a strange man in her house during a storm. Finally, Michael spoke. "So," he said, "what brings you to this little corner of the world?" Sarah hesitated, then decided to be honest. "I live here," she said. "My husband, Tom, used to be a fisherman. But he passed away a few years ago." Michael nodded understandingly. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said softly. "It must be hard." Sarah took a sip of her cocoa, the warmth spreading through her. "It is," she admitted. "But I manage." "And what about you?" Sarah asked, deciding to turn the tables. "What brings you here?" Michael explained that he was a traveler, exploring the country, one small town at a time. He dreamed of seeing all the national parks and writing a book about his adventures. He spoke with such enthusiasm that Sarah couldn't help but smile. "That sounds amazing," she said. Tom always wanted to travel, but he never had the chance. And so, they talked. Sarah shared stories about Tom, his love for the sea, his booming laugh, his kindness to everyone he met. She told Michael about their fishing trips, their cozy evenings by the fire, and the time Tom rescued a baby seal from the beach. Michael listened patiently, offering words of comfort and support. He didn't try to fill the silence with empty platitudes or dismiss her grief. He simply listened, and that made all the difference. As Sarah talked, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. It was good to share her memories of Tom, to keep his spirit alive. It was also good to talk to someone new, someone who didn't know her past and could see her for who she was now. Michael, in turn, told Sarah about his adventures, hiking in the mountains, camping under the stars, and meeting interesting people from all walks of life. He described the beauty of the landscapes he had seen and the joy he felt when discovering new places. His stories were like a breath of fresh air, filling the cottage with a sense of possibility and wonder. Suddenly, a massive gust of wind shook the cottage, rattling the windows and causing the candles to flicker wildly. The storm outside intensified, as if determined to tear the little house apart. Then, with a final surge, the lights went out completely. Sarah gasped, momentarily plunged into darkness. "Oh dear," she said, her voice a little shaky. "I was afraid of that." Michael reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "It's okay," he said reassuringly. "We have candles, right?" Sarah nodded, relieved by his calm demeanor. She fumbled around in the drawer, finding a few more candles and a box of matches. Soon, the cottage was bathed in the warm, flickering glow of candlelight. But the storm wasn't finished yet. The wind howled even louder, and the rain beat against the windows like a relentless drumbeat. They could hear branches snapping outside and the occasional crash as something was blown over by the wind. The atmosphere in the cottage shifted. The cozy feeling was replaced by a sense of vulnerability. They were isolated, cut off from the outside world, at the mercy of the storm. Sarah couldn't help but feel a little scared. The storm seemed to mirror the turmoil inside her heart, the grief and loneliness that she had been trying to suppress. Michael, sensing her fear, moved closer to her, offering a comforting presence in the darkness. He knew that sometimes, just being there for someone was enough. Determined not to let the storm get the best of them, Michael suggested they find something to do. "How about a game?" he asked, rummaging through a drawer. He found an old deck of cards. "Do you know how to play Go Fish?" Sarah smiled. "Tom taught me years ago," she said. "But I haven't played in ages." They spent the next hour playing Go Fish, laughing and teasing each other. Michael told silly jokes, and Sarah shared funny stories about Tom. The game helped to distract them from the storm outside and brought a sense of lightness and fun to the cottage. When their stomachs started to rumble, they decided to make a simple meal. Sarah had some canned soup and crackers. They heated the soup over the fireplace, carefully stirring it to prevent it from burning. It wasn't a fancy meal, but it was warm and filling. As they ate, they talked some more. Michael shared stories about his childhood, his dreams for the future, and his reasons for wanting to travel. Sarah listened intently, feeling a connection to this kind stranger who had unexpectedly entered her life. Working together, playing games, and sharing a simple meal, they transformed a potentially scary situation into a memorable evening. The storm was still raging outside, but inside the cottage, there was warmth, laughter, and a growing sense of companionship. Sarah realized that even in the darkest of times, hope could be found in the most unexpected places. Even amidst the laughter and games, Michael couldn't help but notice the lingering sadness in Sarah's eyes. He saw it in the way she sometimes stared into the flickering candlelight, a faraway look on her face. He knew that grief was a heavy burden to carry, and he wanted to help her lighten it, even if just for a little while. So, he started telling her more funny stories, tales of his travel mishaps, encounters with quirky characters, and silly things he had seen along the way. He described the time he accidentally wore mismatched shoes on a hiking trip, or when he tried to cook a gourmet meal over a campfire and ended up setting his beard on fire. Sarah chuckled at his stories, her eyes sparkling with amusement. He also shared kind words, complimenting her cozy cottage, her delicious cocoa, and her warm and generous spirit. He told her that she was a strong and resilient woman, and that she deserved to be happy. "You know," he said gently, "it's okay to miss Tom. But it's also okay to smile and laugh and enjoy life again. He wouldn't want you to be sad forever." Sarah looked at him, surprised by his words. She hadn't expected such wisdom from a stranger. But somehow, Michael's words resonated with her. She realized that he was right. Tom wouldn't want her to be unhappy. He would want her to embrace life and find joy again. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could find happiness again, even after all this time. The storm raged on, but inside the cottage, something had shifted. Sarah felt lighter, as if a small weight had been lifted from her heart. Michael's stories and his genuine kindness had created a space for her to breathe, to remember the joy in life, even amidst the sadness. Then, Michael told a particularly silly joke, something about a penguin trying to sell ice to Eskimos. It was so ridiculous that Sarah couldn't help but burst out laughing. It wasn't just a polite chuckle, it was a real, heartfelt laugh, the kind that made her stomach ache and her eyes water. She hadn't laughed like that in years. It felt strange and wonderful at the same time. The sound of her own laughter filled the cottage, chasing away the shadows and replacing them with a sense of warmth and happiness. Michael smiled, pleased to have brought her such joy. He realized that laughter was a powerful medicine, capable of healing even the deepest wounds. As Sarah's laughter subsided, she wiped away a tear from her eye. "Thank you," she said, her voice a little shaky. "I needed that." Michael reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. "You're welcome," he said. "Anytime." The storm continued to howl outside, but inside the cottage, there was a sense of peace. Sarah and Michael sat in comfortable silence, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows on the walls. They had weathered the storm together, and in doing so, they had found a connection, a friendship, and a shared moment of hope. As dawn approached, the storm finally began to subside. The wind died down, the rain softened to a gentle drizzle, and the first rays of sunlight peeked through the clouds. Sarah and Michael, who had both dozed off in their chairs, stirred awake. Sarah stretched and yawned, feeling surprisingly refreshed. She looked out the window and gasped. The sky was a brilliant blue, and the sea sparkled in the sunlight. Everything looked clean and new, as if the storm had washed away all the old worries and sorrows. "Wow," Michael said, equally impressed by the transformation. "It's like a different world out there." They stepped outside, breathing in the fresh, salty air. The storm had left its mark, branches were scattered on the ground, and a few shingles were missing from the roof. But the overall effect was one of renewal and rebirth. The birds were singing, the flowers were blooming, and the world seemed to be celebrating the end of the storm. Sarah felt a sense of optimism she hadn't experienced in a long time. The storm had brought darkness and fear, but it had also brought Michael into her life, and with him, a renewed sense of hope. She looked at Michael, standing beside her in Tom's old clothes, and smiled. "Thank you," she said. "For everything." Michael smiled back. "It was my pleasure," he said. "I'm glad I could be here." After a quick breakfast of toast and jam, Michael was eager to get his car fixed. He was surprisingly handy with engines, a skill he'd picked up during his travels. He went down to the road to examine his car. After tinkering for about an hour, he managed to get the engine running again. He returned to the cottage, his face beaming with satisfaction. "Good news," he announced. "My car is fixed. I'll be able to get back on the road soon." Sarah felt a pang of sadness. She had enjoyed Michael's company, and she would miss his cheerful presence. But she knew that he couldn't stay forever. "That's wonderful," she said, trying to sound happy. "I'm glad you were able to fix it." Michael thanked her again for her kindness and hospitality. "I don't know what I would have done without you," he said. "You really saved me." He gathered his belongings, changed back into his own clothes, and prepared to leave. Sarah watched him, a mixture of emotions swirling inside her. She was grateful for his help and companionship, but she also felt a sense of loss as he prepared to depart. It was as if the light that had filled her cottage was about to be extinguished. "Well," Michael said, extending his hand. "It was lovely meeting you, Sarah. I'll never forget this." Sarah shook Michael's hand, a small smile playing on her lips. But inside, her heart felt heavy. She hadn't realized how much she had enjoyed his company until now, as he stood ready to leave. His presence had filled the empty spaces in her cottage, chasing away the loneliness and reminding her of the joy of connection. He had listened to her stories, made her laugh, and offered her a glimpse of a brighter future. Now, that light was about to disappear. She thought about all the things they had shared, the hot cocoa, the games, the stories, the laughter. It had been a brief encounter, but it had touched her deeply. She realized that she hadn't felt this alive in years. As Michael walked towards his car, Sarah felt a strong urge to ask him to stay. Just for a little while longer. But she held back. She knew that he had his own life to live, his own adventures to pursue. She couldn't ask him to put his dreams on hold for her. But the sadness was undeniable. It was a sharp, aching feeling, a reminder of all that she had lost and all that she longed for. She knew that she would never forget Michael, the kind stranger who had brought a little bit of sunshine into her life during a stormy night. The cottage would feel awfully quiet again. Just as Michael was about to get into his car, he paused and turned back to Sarah. "Wait," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small piece of paper and a pen. "Here," he said, scribbling something down. "This is my email address and phone number. If you ever need anything, or if you just want to chat, please don't hesitate to reach out." He handed her the paper, his eyes filled with sincerity. "And," he added with a smile, "if you ever find yourself near where I am, please come visit. I'd love to show you around." Sarah took the paper, her fingers trembling slightly. She looked at the numbers and letters, a tangible connection to this kind stranger who had touched her life so unexpectedly. "Thank you, Michael," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will." She tucked the paper safely into her pocket, feeling a renewed sense of hope. Maybe this wasn't goodbye after all. Maybe this was just the beginning of a new friendship, a new chapter in her life. Michael smiled, gave her a final wave, and climbed into his car. He started the engine, and with a puff of smoke, he drove away, leaving Sarah standing alone in her garden. But this time, she didn't feel quite so lonely. She had a memory to cherish, a connection to hold on to, and a reason to look forward to the future. The storm had passed, and a new day had begun. Sarah watched as Michael's car disappeared down the road, a small cloud of dust swirling in its wake. She stood there for a long time, the sea breeze rustling through her hair, the sun warming her face. The cottage felt quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. It wasn't the heavy, lonely silence that had haunted her for so long. This was a different kind of quiet, a peaceful quiet, a quiet filled with memories and possibilities. She reached into her pocket and touched the piece of paper with Michael's contact information. She smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes. She felt a sense of hope, a renewed belief in the possibility of happiness. The storm had brought darkness and fear, but it had also brought light and connection. It had reminded her that even after loss and grief, there was still beauty and joy to be found in the world. She knew that she would always miss Tom, and that his memory would forever be etched in her heart. But she also knew that she couldn't let grief define her life. She had to find a way to move forward, to embrace the future, and to find happiness again. Michael's visit had shown her that it was possible. He had reminded her that she was still capable of laughter, of connection, of joy. And for that, she would be forever grateful. The world felt a little less scary and a little more promising. Inspired by Michael's adventurous spirit and his stories of faraway places, Sarah made a decision. She was going to take a trip. It wouldn't be a long trip, or a grand adventure, but it would be something. A chance to step outside her comfort zone, to see something new, and to embrace the possibilities that lay ahead. She thought about visiting the nearby town she had always wanted to see, with its charming shops and beautiful gardens. Or maybe she would visit her sister, whom she hadn't seen in far too long. The possibilities seemed endless. The important thing was that she was taking action, that she was choosing to move forward instead of dwelling on the past. She was no longer content to sit by the sea and watch the world go by. She wanted to be a part of it, to experience its beauty and its wonders. She went inside the cottage, her heart filled with excitement. She pulled out her suitcase and began to pack, carefully choosing the clothes she would need for her adventure. As she packed, she thought about Michael, and she smiled. He had given her a gift, the gift of hope, the gift of inspiration. She might be going on this trip alone, but she knew that she wasn't truly alone. She had Michael's friendship, Tom's memory, and a renewed sense of self. She was ready to embrace the future, whatever it might hold. The storm had brought them together, and in the darkness, they had found hope. And now, with the sun shining brightly, Sarah was ready to step into the light.